now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gary Parker. I'm the Associate Dean for External Affairs at the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis, where I have the great privilege of serving as the inaugural director of the Clark Fox Policy Institute. And welcome to Open Classroom. This is our way of opening the virtual doors to our school and allowing you the opportunity to brush up on some professional development or learn a topic that you may not have known too much about. And today we're going to learn about what COVID-19 reveals about small businesses and entrepreneurship. But before we hand this over to Janet Gillow, our Director of Professional Development and my co-host, and Heather Cameron, who's our guest speaker today, I wanted to just let you know about a really wonderful panel that's happening on July 9th at 12:30. It's part 6 of our COVID-19 and race series. This one will focus on talking to children about race and social justice. And for that, we have Heather Fleming, who is the founder of In-Person Educational Services, Mary Ferguson, who's the Racial Justice Director for the YWCA, Adelaide Lancaster, who is a co-founder of We Stories and co-chair of the board for Forward Through Ferguson, Alex Stallings, who's our community engagement manager over at the 9 Network. And we're going to have a guest moderator that will join Atia Thurman, Jason Heiserer, who is the head of Crossroads College Preparatory College. So we're really very, very excited about that program. And so for those of you just joining us, although your cameras are off and your microphones are turned off, we want to hear from you. So please feel free to share your thoughts and your questions in the chat feature, and Janet and I will share them with Heather. And I just know that this is going to be a wonderfully engaging conversation. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, the incomparable Janet Gillow.
Thank you, Gary. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Open Classroom. We have a really special program today with Dr. Heather Cameron. She's the Michael B. Kaufman Professor of Practice in Social Entrepreneurship at the Brown School. At our school, she leads a transdisciplinary curriculum in social innovation and entrepreneurship. Her research focuses on comparative urban education and development, as well as social impact strategies. Outside of Heather's academic career, she's also the founder of several prize-winning social enterprises in the fields of education and sports for community development, including Box Girls and Camp Crew. So she's here today to offer thoughts on COVID-19 and small business and entrepreneurship. Please give a warm Brown School Open Classroom welcome to Dr. Heather Cameron.
Yay, welcome everybody, and greetings from Weissenfels, Germany. I have been here since the end of February when the travel ban took effect, and so have been watching the growing COVID developments, as well as all of the demonstrations and organizing from the German perspective, which has been in some ways pretty scary, but also in another way somewhat giving some hope to realize that many more people are paying attention to things that we've been pointing to for a long time. But so that's why you're seeing me with a German palace in the background. I'm actually sitting in a very, very old hunting lodge right now, which also had the honor of where Johann Sebastian Bach first performed the so-called hunting cantata. So I am literally lecturing to you from the room where it happened for Bach. And so I hope with some of this energy and kind of old world spirit, we can talk about some very new world problems. But I'm also interested to talk to some of you who are also perhaps not only spending time in St. Louis or coming from another country, looking at some of these things, that what we're seeing, what it says about the American policy environment. So in addition to being located in Germany, I also locate myself as someone who does social entrepreneurship. So what that means is that I am interested not just in making businesses efficient or maximizing profit or getting startups funded, but thinking about how do we use market tools to improve social and environmental outcomes. And that's the main focus as compared to profit maximization. So when we look, if you were going to do sort of a coaching session on small businesses, that might look a little different. I'm interested here as a member of the Brown School community to take a look at business, entrepreneurship, small business from also a racial equity perspective, a systematic perspective, so that we can think about both things that problems we can see immediately and do something about now and need to, and also for a more longer view about if we're going to be needing to rebuild things after hopefully COVID is over in this form. Who do we need to be thinking about? How do we be needing to do that building? So before we go further, I'd like to ask Janet to launch the first poll, which to find out a little bit about who's here participating with us. So here's a bunch of different categories. If we haven't got a category that fits you there, maybe if you can hit a comment and let us know. So you can just click on that poll and then we can have a bit of an idea who's participating in the group here. And then Janet will publish it and we'll see who we've got. High school student, excellent, from India. Welcome, Viraj. See some educators. Bethany's getting back, she can't see the poll.
5 more seconds.
Well, we've got a really high response rate. We're at 77%. That's fantastic. So folks are really
awesome.
engaged.
Evaluation, senior scientist, law school student. Okay, and we've got some small business owners. Okay, that's great. Early childhood learning educator, alum. Hey, Tiffany, welcome. Potential future business owner. All right, well, we want to make you a smart one, a smart and effective one, Tiffany. So thank you for joining. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more going forward here. Teachers also, welcome all the teachers. It's all about entrepreneurial mindset. So what we're going to talk about today is about the current state of the COVID crisis for small businesses in the US. We're going to be talking after that about some of the vulnerabilities and about vulnerability and resiliency, and about how this event, which everybody was talking about, oh, we're all equally affected. We saw very quickly that that wasn't the case. That of course we're all affected, but different positions of strength or vulnerability, different histories of systematic oppression or exclusion had huge effects on the way that people were able to react to the COVID and continue to react to the COVID in terms of like the health system. We've also seen activists drawing attention to the different outcomes in the criminal justice system. Some of us know this, and some people are learning it kind of for the first time and can't look away because it's becoming such a mass movement. Well, what I'd like us to be thinking about here and learning based on some recent reports put out by the Census Bureau and also McKinsey is to understand how Black business owners and Black entrepreneurs have a very different experience under COVID. So that's what we'll talk about. And then we'll get into some very sort of specific strategies and tactics around preserving small business in St. Louis. And I see that a few of you also are pointing out that you're part of some of the regional efforts around economic development in St. Louis. We'd love to hear you, chime in there. And then when we think about the bigger picture and having our attention drawn to the various vulnerabilities that we see in the system, if we're going to rebuild, then how do we rebuild better? People are talking about, oh, I just want things to get back to normal. Right? There's many of us who are not accepting what was normal before, right? We do not want to go back to normal, right? We want to use what we've learned through this experience to build a better economy, a better healthcare system, many better systems. So that's our hope here. So if we're going to have the opportunity to rebuild, then let's at least do it smarter. Great. So, people have talked about small business being in a mass extinction event because of the incredible small margins that people have in terms of what money that they have available to keep their business running when all of their customers stop coming. Statistically, it's something like 21 days of cash available before they would need to like close operations. So you saw with 1.7 small businesses being hit by COVID that had 20 million workers, that's like 12% of US business revenue. A substantial part of that got shut down. And the people who were the most likely to be shut down were firms with less than 100 employees. It's defined as small businesses under 500 employees. Most people wouldn't recognize that as a small business kind of in common sense, but that's the definition. But it was the smaller companies that were worst affected. And that at a poll from May 2020 showed that 58% of these small business owners were extremely, which was the highest, or very concerned about their ability to financially deal with the outcomes of COVID. The other thing that's been challenging is the efforts from the government to provide so-called PPP loans, or Paycheck Protection Program loans. You might have been hearing in the newspaper that large public companies were getting these loans, right? Or that people who were very well connected to major banks were getting these loans, but other people who were underbanked or unbanked or clients of a credit union were not able to get these loans. So this has also been a challenge. So even though some money's been put out and that's given some people some breathing room, not everybody who's applied knows whether or not they got it. And also there's been quite a lot of questions for people about, you know, can I use it? How much am I going to get? Is there a risk to keeping it? Luckily, yesterday, the the House passed an extension, which is allowing people to keep applying. But there was really quite a rush on this money. But so this has basically been the challenge. A lot of small businesses, they don't have enough cash to stay open if there's no customers. The smallest companies were the ones that were most at risk. Business confidence was very low. And then realizing that some of these tools, which are supposed to help everybody, weren't really getting there. And so we get quite a differentiated version of vulnerability here. So I'll just move to that. So this is one of those graphics that tries to plot things against each other. I'll read some of it out because I know some of you might be joining us from a phone or similar. But you're seeing on the y-axis going up and down is basically the financial risk. And on the bottom here is like the degree that's being affected by COVID. So on the far side, you can imagine the people who are having some of the worst of it are accommodation and food services. Okay, if you're a restaurant, you've got problems. If you're a hotel, you've got problems. Until recently, if you were somebody who was renting canoes out on Lake of the Ozarks, you had problems because nobody was allowed to be doing those activities. Similar for art, entertainment, and recreation. The cinemas are still closed, big concerts, the Muni, educational services where Janet and Gary and I are, again, are slightly at risk. You see our research friends do a little bit better. And then moving over here to where, of course, people in finance never really have any problems. So they're over here on the safe side of everything, low financial risk and less affected by COVID. But when we look at this, we realize again that based on what sort of business you're in, you're gonna have a different level of exposure, all right? And so then that takes us to our next category, because who wants to guess which people are most at risk for being disadvantaged by COVID? We will see. It's going to be Black-owned businesses. So let's take a look from a recent, again, this is end of May. So things have luckily changed quite a bit in June, if you're following some of the statistics about joblessness. But this is showing what the 5 worst segments were for COVID. They were hospitality, retail, services, transportation, and construction. Hospitality was down 25% as a sector, retail was down by 15, services were down by 12, transport also down by 12, and construction down by 10 compared to their time before, okay? And then when you look at Black-owned firms, 40% of them are in these areas compared to 40% of them make their money or make their revenues from these areas as compared to 25% for firms altogether. So what that basically means is that there are Black-owned businesses which are concentrated in the areas which are most at risk. So just as we've been seeing people of color doing the work as essential workers and being most at risk because they're working as nurses' aides, they're working as psychiatric aides, they're cleaners, that they're overrepresented in these jobs and that they're more at risk, then even the business owners are more at risk because their businesses are also concentrated in market segments which are severely down. Okay, so let me look at this next part of this at the bottom is where does the money come from? So again, you see these larger numbers like 0.6%, 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, and 4 is again, just sort of showing the concentration of Black-owned businesses being in these areas which are most at risk. So what you have is a group of businesses which are being hit first. You can imagine this sort of with the housing analogy. And if you have people of color and Black housing kind of on the riverfront, and when it floods, they always flood first. This is kind of what's happening here with COVID. And so that their revenue share and their exposure to long-term effects of the COVID contraction is not proportional to their share of business and market. And so when they did the the survey, when they did the survey at the end of May, 55% of the Black business owners were saying that they had furloughed or had laid off staff or were even planning to close, compared to 48% of all respondents. So again, they're out there on the edge in a way that makes them much more vulnerable to their business and basically their assets being destroyed through something like this, while other people who don't have that same position and vulnerability don't have to worry about that as much. So that would be bad enough, but part of the continuing challenge is, okay, so here's another version of just from a different angle kind of, but again, showing which types of businesses are most affected by COVID-19, and how many of them are like basically owned by minority owners. So you have a lot in food services and accommodation, personal and laundry services and retail. And again, it's just sort of overweighting it so that, again, it's not like all the business owners have risk. It's like some people have a lot more risk and vulnerability than others. You can see, again, our friends in finance and insurance are down here on the bottom, kind of safely sheltering in place. All right. So the other part of this, and again, is probably not a surprise to people who are connected to the Brown School and are doing this sort of work in our community, is that Black-owned businesses started off in poor financial health. In terms of, and financial health is in this case being defined as their profitability, the credit score, and the likelihood that they have the ability to finance the growth of their business through retained earnings. So i.e. you were not running your business off your credit card, you're running your business off the money you earned last year to keep continuing to grow it. Also, the assets that Black Black founders have, when they have them, tend to be less liquid assets. So for example, a white founder might have a brokerage account or money or whatever, friends and family money, while a Black founder would have to put up her house. And so it's very difficult to get rid of or to liquidate assets like real estate, like your possessions, as compared to just having cash on hand. So again, when they do surveys about how people are able to make money available, white founders in general are able to have liquid assets available, so they don't have to sell anything at a loss just to have enough money to keep running their business, while minority entrepreneurs generally have assets which it costs them a lot to sell. Imagine if you had a fire sale basically of your house in order to keep your business running. you're going to be losing out on those transactions. That's exactly what happened in the recession, is that a lot of people, like middle class African-American people who'd worked hard and done a good job in being able to own homes and things, had those assets basically become almost worthless overnight, while other people who had more options didn't have to sell their houses at the bottom or foreclose on their houses at the bottom of a market. So again, it's a question about who is vulnerable, who needs to act right away, who's given more time to think and be able to be more strategic. And then even businesses.
Can I ask a question?
Of
I'm
course.
so sorry to interrupt. I want to ask, we're getting some inquiry, like when you say minority owned businesses, do you mean just Black owned businesses, or does that also include other people of color?
That's a great question. The studies I'm referring to will go back and forth on those. So most of the time, the first slide we looked at when it was looking at the market share was definitely Black owned businesses in terms of these scores. The phrasing from the report was minority, but in terms of these actual hospitality, retail, service, transport, and constructs was referring to Black owned businesses. But then when you go here to the next section where we're looking at general vulnerability, then this was also including Latinx and other minorities in terms of being involved in the different types of business sectors. So we're going a bit back and forth. But for most of the studies here, which we have as a link in the at the end of the paper, I saw you're explaining to participants that they can get a copy of this after. We've included some of the reports you can go in and take a look at yourself. That's part of the challenge in doing some of this work, is how do we get enough statistics, which are also broken out in terms of gender, which are broken out in terms of geography. Rural small businesses have also special challenges. But I wanted to bring this report to your attention because it was like the latest, trying to, again, to show some of the risks that minority entrepreneurs are facing. So it's broken out a little bit separately. I'll try and be a little bit more specific as we go through this. All right, do we have any other questions that we should hop on right now, Gary?
We can continue.
Okay, so this is the wonkiest part, everybody. We're gonna get into a bit more discussion, but I wanted to, I'm always impressed when our fancy consultants can come up with scatter graphs, which actually help us see kind of through the trees. Because again, there's something nice about the idea that we're all facing this pandemic and we all need to think hard about what's important and so on. But I think many of us know neighbors and friends and colleagues who are facing very different types of challenges than our own families may be facing. And those of us who are also wanting to influence the policy space need to help with a more differentiated understanding of where help is needed. And this is the challenge. It shouldn't just be money to everybody, but to try and think about what needs to be put where. And so some of this helps us. So coming back again to the general challenges, and this is again referring in this case, it's again minority, but then they have certain points where they're saying just Black. Limited access to credit, that probably doesn't surprise anybody, that because of systematic redlining and so on, and lack of access to banking, Black families and Black founders, in this case, Black-owned businesses, are getting 29% approval on business loans as compared to 60%. That's loan approval, sorry, not load approval. And also when investment is being made into businesses, smaller ticket sizes. Our friends, Arlen Hamilton from Backstage Capital talks about this a lot in terms of like, how do we get money also just to, brilliant Black entrepreneurs. They're getting smaller tickets, but even they manage to get the funding. And then as we saw at the beginning, that minority owned businesses, and of course, Black businesses being a very big part of that, are even further exposed to challenges because of COVID, because of just the market segments that they're in. And some of those market segments are because they require less capitalization. They require perhaps less access to sort of the social capital you need to start certain types of businesses. But in any case, they're on the front line and are getting battered by COVID. So, and so giving that as a starting position and then adding to that all this crazy COVIDness, we can sort of see what's going to happen or what could happen, is that there's going to be, that these Black and minority-owned businesses are more susceptible to bankruptcy because their businesses are exposed to the social distancing, that the fact that they already have restricted access to capital, and then to have even less opportunity to get access to credit. Some of you might have also been following in the news about how credit lines are being tightened because everybody's hoarding cash, including the banks, which is not their job, but is what they keep doing. And then also statistically, on average, Black employers are less likely to reach out to professional services companies. McKinsey suggested, because they charge $5,000 a day, that it's maybe about the cost of getting these services. It's also a question of social capital. If your neighbor happens to be a CPA, then perhaps you do ask her some questions about tax strategy. But if you're living in a place where there's not the same amount of professionals and social capital, then that's also a challenge to get access to that advice in a way that we just take for granted in certain communities. And then finally, when we think about this loss of income, right? Not just, destruction of assets, but even just the regular drop in income because of the unemployment. It's coming into an already structurally challenged Black community because of systemic and structural racism. There's already inadequate healthcare. There's already a lack of essential businesses and economic activity in these communities. And so if more businesses fail, then we have, or are destroyed is maybe fairer, then it even reduces further the tax base, which turns it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is, again, why we need to see it not just be about business coaching and bootstrapping and, how do we, innovate the hell out of this? That might be part of it, but to understand the systematic angles on it and to realize that cities like St. Louis invest so heavily in entrepreneurship, right? And cities like St. Louis are like, we are a post-industrial city. We're not going to be bringing big manufacturers necessarily to our community. We have things like Cortex. We have things like the Geospatial Institute. We have our research universities, and we have a wonderful community. We have the sports teams. But again, it's been huge investments from many of the big players in entrepreneurship and in small business. You have the Small Business Administration working hard with contractors because there's going to be so many things built in St. Louis, right? And this is a lot of an opportunity for people to get in as small contractors to do some of that work. Also, our university continues to build and create jobs. But then how do we get people, how do we think about the entrepreneurial and small business ecosystem now, right? So that we don't need to we have to completely kill it and then rebuild it again, because St. Louis is betting on this. And so this is part of the reason why we need to think about stuff we can do kind of today to help small businesses, but then importantly, think about what, from what we're seeing about some of the structural challenges for Black and minority small business and entrepreneurs. I'm talking a little bit more about small business, but those of you who are interested in the small entrepreneur side and venture funding and so on, happy to talk about that. What do we have to do today? And what do we need to be thinking about and lobbying for and fighting for when we rebuild it better from what we've learned here? Okay. So Gary and Janet, anything interesting I should hit before I get into my business coaching mode?
There are a couple of questions, regarding, what national policies could be changed that might be helpful for small businesses. And do you think this is a good time for a small business to start up?
Oh my goodness. I hope that's not Tiffany saying she wants to be a future business owner there. But well, yes. I mean, I'm one of those people who's going to say, is this a good time for me to start a business? And I'll be like, yes, but starting a business doesn't mean quitting your job and just starting a business. Starting a business means finding your first customer, right? Yeah. Understanding a problem you can solve for somebody, and to work on understanding some of the changing environments. And I mean, this is not all doom and gloom. I don't want to give the doom and gloom talk. I want to give the let's not pretend everybody's experiencing this the same way talk, and let's not try and come back with some sort of bland white bread answer for economic development. So I would not be investing a ton of money in a new business right now, but I would be using the opportunity to talk to people, find out what they need, find a way to create a small test to see if you can, sell to people, provide them with a service they want to pay for, and then use this opportunity and disruption to see how big you can get it kind of as a side hustle. In terms of federal policy, I'm going to speak to that kind of in the second piece as we think about what some of the larger structural and policy changes need to be. So let's, though, I'd love to find out a bit about what people are thinking. So we had about 12% of the people coming saying that they were working for a small business or owning a small business. So if we can maybe have you guys hit the chat with a few ideas, and then we'll see how many of ideas of what you think are important or what's also already on my list. Those of you who are also consulting with small business owners and so on, or anybody who really wants to jump in here, but I'd love to hear some of you who are in the thick of it, if you want to say a few things that are keeping you afloat. Coming online. Wow, Peggy feeding back that the SBA, yeah, sometimes it's true in terms of that's the problem with the bureaucracy here, right? Pointing out that either you're too big for a program, you're too small for a program. St. Louis Heartland Black Chamber of Commerce, wraparound professional services. But many of the small Black businesses are not members or do not know that. Yeah, well, this is why, again, we're gonna, so thank you for if you can name check people or even little website links, that'll be helpful to people. Pivoting goods and services offerings, right? Yeah, well, we all know that we've got some very smart, savvy entrepreneurs in this group too. Is anybody handing out takeaway cocktails in front of their businesses or things like that? I was happy to read that's possible in Missouri. Only in Missouri would that work. Okay, so let's see what I've got on my list here. Oh, actually, no, we're going to have a poll first. Janet, if you want to, I know everyone's going to say all of the above, but you're not allowed to say all of the above for this question. So if we want to hit the next one.
Sorry, trying to, and it's being ornery.
All right. Doug's pointing out new opportunities, things like telemedicine, the government partnerships critical in these innovations, right? And the sales cycle to government is forever. And then Bethany Thanks is pointing out that the limited liability corporation for my massage business also confers any other service business. So I transitioned away from massage therapy to consulting and mediation. Excellent, which I can do remotely. Yeah, again, people are pointing about the hard pivot. So let's see what else you guys think. So what's the most important thing for small businesses right now? All right, is this the answer to it all, Janet, or are we still waiting on people?
This is the answer. These are our results.
Okay, great. Brand is also pointing out up to $5,000 in grant opportunities or some STI. Oh, and there's a web link. Thank you very much, Mr. Brand St. Louis. Okay, you can tell that we are skewing a little bit social worky when only 15% are saying cash flow. All right, anybody else here having a little heart attack when they see 15% says cash flow? I see somebody here was a treasurer of a company. Do you want to hit us up on chat? Or anybody else having a reaction to that answer? Okay, because I would say all of these things are of course important, and it's interesting to see how we look at it. But this is all a waiting game. This is all how can you hibernate? Either can you hibernate or can you pivot the hell out of it, like we're seeing these examples, so that you have enough money to keep the lights on, so that your landlord is not forcing you to sell your stuff. Okay, Peggy's saying she would have said cash flow. Okay, it's easy, Peggy, once we've already said what the answer is, to say I would have said cash flow, but I gotcha. And Bethany's pointing out cash flow needs were met by giving back to school and getting paid job training. Smart, also a strategy. Betsy pointing out from Mosaic that many of our minority businesses do not have their license information or financial data available to apply early for these programs. And I'm advising some startups, and even startups are allowed to apply for payroll protection. And they were saying that they were actually able to get more investment when they showed they qualified for PPP because it showed that they had their papers in order. And some of us who also work in nonprofit know that some people are like, oh my God, if you can get a grant from Ford, you can get a grant from everybody, from anybody, because their requirements are so strict. If you can show that you have the bureaucratic wherewithal to write that grant, everybody else will follow along because they know that the vetting and the quality and the financial record keeping you need to do is that high. And so again, this is a barrier for a lot of companies who don't necessarily have a formal relationship to banking, who are maybe working with again, sort of lending groups or smaller things. And so don't have like the standard relationship to a bank that maybe some other companies enjoyed. And that's why the first round of PPP generally went to some of the top clients of some of the major banks. And it was only in the second round that some of our top CDFIs, community development, financial institutions, were able to service more minority and female clients, and also just people in general living in North City. Okay, we've got lots of great comments here. So again, we've kind of got a bit of hyperlinking on everything. You've got me talking, we've got PowerPoint up, and then Dawn and others throwing in some great comments into the chat. So I hope you guys have got the chat up in a window here too. Gary, can you kind of read what Dawn said there out for everybody about affordable housing?
Yeah, affordable housing has now become a preferred investment opportunity in real estate. St. Louis's affordable housing stock is a train wreck, ripe for retooling based upon adding social services supplied by small business owners in healthcare. And Wall Street is talking about this.
Yeah, this is again another opportunity where Black families and minority families have often been putting their money into like real estate assets, right? I think we know families who've bought their own home in North City and then buying other homes, and their other family members being able to then profit and have some generational distribution of assets. So again, for a lot of immigrants and minorities, this was the first way to collect the capital that would be needed that could perhaps later be deployed in a more risky situation like a small business. And so when you look at housing trusts and ways to invest and do things in affordable housing, yeah, there's I think a lot more that could be done rather than just inviting the hedge funds in to do it for us. Okay, and then Maya points out the best advice I ever received in starting a business was first to get a lawyer, an accountant, and a banker. Yeah. And you see, this is the thing. Some of us are sitting around dinner tables where people talk about this and other people never get to talk about this. And so the first time they hear about it is hopefully in an entrepreneurship class with us or at the library or, you know, from some sort of cousin with a side hustle. And how do we get this information out? How do we make sure that when entrepreneurship is all about making mistakes, about failing fast and all of these like sexy concepts, but it's not fun to fail fast when you get like taken out of the game. And that's part of the point about resiliency, right? It's like, how do we help people be able to learn and to fail and to grow, but not to have their first situation be that they can't get a loan because they don't know the right people who said, get an accountant, a lawyer, and a banker. How do we make sure that people can stay in the game long enough that they get good at the game and that they can change the game so that it's more, you know, good for all of us, that we get access to awesome businesses and families can build wealth that that doesn't get stolen from them the first time there's a downtick in the economy because they're overexposed. All right, so let's, so these are some of the things that I put down in terms of some of the groups that I'm working with. Nothing here is, you know, totally new. But yes, first, you know, being in communication with your customers. A lot of people are under huge amounts of stress, obviously, or dealing with lots of challenges, let alone family disasters in certain cases. And just to make sure that you are communicating that they understand why you're closed or how you're opening or what you care about or what you're offering. If you're moving from being a massage therapist to offering mediation or meditation services, then let people know that. To be, as people have already talked about, creating new business products or services for the problems that your current customers are facing. So people pointed to telehealth, people pointed to moving away from like a hands-on kind of job. And then that's a technology pivot using kind of a cute entrepreneurial word, but like how do you change direction quickly so that you don't lose momentum and try something else out. So I'm sure it was quite a different job going from massage to mediation. But if you have those skills and that's something you can do over computers, then just go for it rather than stay at home and not be a massage therapist. Kind of obvious is reduce spending. A lot of people don't do this fast enough though. And again, you saw with some of the startups that they literally fired half their staff. And I'm like, whoa, you know, but on the other hand, if it's going to happen, it may as well happen early in order to be able to create whatever smaller team that you need to go forward. There's also you know, we're not going to be saying everybody's in this position because they're not, everybody's in the same position, but you're not going to be the first person talking to your landlord asking for rental relief. So again, I even, because I'm stuck in Germany, was able to come to an agreement with my landlord. So don't feel shy about talking to people you do business with. They're interested also in your long-term success. So to come up with some sort of negotiated settlement, you'd be surprised what's negotiable these days. Obviously, you perhaps as the founder, your executive pay, but the leaders of our university were some of the first to like, you know, take a large salary cut, also our dean, so that we could protect the salaries of some of the other staff that worked at our school. It should be a no-brainer, but of course it's leaders who do that, who really do earn the loyalty, as well as buy themselves more time. Because if you don't need to take a paycheck and you can reduce what you take out of your business for the time being, that gives you more capital, that gives you more agility. And if you are keeping a payroll, that makes your staff really understand that if you're asking them to also take a pay cut and you're cutting your pay or not taking anything, then of course that's going to, you know, show the seriousness of the situation, but also that you are trying to take everybody into account and not just thinking in a short term about yourself. Network and support other small businesses. I love these examples from Brand STL and from Betsy about different resources and things. Also just for your own mental health and flourishing. You know, this is a hard time to be doing this work, and entrepreneurs and small business people are problem solvers, and we're out there trying to, you know, make things work and have the hustle. So don't let that burn out. You know, be talking to people, find ways to maybe get things done as a group or to make things cheaper as a group, or to at least preserve what you've got as a group, rather than kind of falling into, you know, being isolated and not able to bring yourself up and have new strategies. And then there's a really awesome website from the St. Louis Regional Chamber, which I'm sure some of you've used. Peggy's pointing out that you can also join the different chambers of commerce in Afton and LeMay, Webster Groves, Kirkwood, etc. Yeah, there's going to be groups which are going to keep you not just informed about opportunities for funding, but for opportunities for strategic planning, just also for bitch sessions, just to talk about how challenging this is with each other, but that can be a huge help. So all of the networking that it took to get your business started, you know, put that back to work so that you're talking and learning about things. And then also from the love, this is another kind of hit the chat up situation, but like, what are you doing now to support small businesses? So this, if you're a small, here's the, let me just show you some of these websites. So that's the Regional Chamber website, which is kind of the top website with all the latest info. If you've got other examples, please hit us in the chat. Plus our friends at Justine Peterson have been doing this work since forever and are continuing to help people get their papers in order to apply for these loans. But let's, some of you are, so of the 15% who are owners, what about the other 85% who aren't owners? What are you doing for some of your favorite companies? What are some of, what are the things that you've done to help make sure that the restaurant you love stays there? I know a lot of us love Left Bank Books. So like, what are you guys doing to make sure that some of these people are there, what we get out of this? Buying from them, yes. Okay, I know some of these questions are a little bit obvious, but let's see. Yeah, avoiding Amazon. Yeah. Referrals, pre-purchasing, Janet. Yep. Gift card. Oh, see. Okay. See, we're gonna see. We're all pretty tied up together on this. Okay. So first of all, yes, buy from them. Social media support. Also rate them and make them more visible on some of these things. And then this idea of someone was talking about pre-buying. Yay, yay, yay. So again, buying subscriptions, gift certificates, memberships, and stuff, because that again helps them with the all-important cash flow. Cash flow should not have been number 4. Okay. And then also to think about CDFIs, right? St. Louis Community Bank, Justine Peterson, a whole bunch of other ones, which I'm embarrassed, I'm not going to name them all, are involved in getting money into the small businesses we say we want to help, right? Who aren't necessarily able to access money from the mainstream financial system. So when you have a checking account at like the St. Louis Community Credit Union, for example, your extra money in that in your CDs or in your longer savings papers and stuff, that's being used to like finance kindergartens or to make some small business loan to somebody, you know, living next to O'Fallon Park. So rather than bank it be at BOA or somewhere else, you can think about, okay, I'm going to put my money in my community. And if you do it at a CDFI, that's something you can do. How much risk is there for an individual to bank with the CDFIs? I wish we had one of the CDFIs. They've got a great pitch on this. They're also insured, like a regular bank is insured for your regular accounts. And then for larger organizations, YouthBridge Community Foundation, for example, their board, very bold, very awesome move, decided to put a large part of their endowment into Justine Peterson CDFI to make their money. Their YouthBridge Community Foundation is all about helping children and youth in the community. And they realized if they could put their money into a CDFI, which was then doing projects in that area for them in St. Louis, they would get 1, an excellent financial and safe financial return, and 2, their money would go a hell of a lot further. So I would take a look. There's some great articles if you kind of look at the newspapers around YouthBridge, and Justine Peterson will tell you a little bit about how some of the foundations who have to be extremely safe and strict with how they invest their money, about how they're putting it to work in CDFIs. Also, the Deaconess Foundation's also been a leader in this space. And so as soon as foundations are able to do it with their tax laws and very strict fiduciary responsibilities, you're good to go. Yeah, credit unions. Okay, Peggy's putting out some also points. Okay, awesome. All right, so that's the yay left bank books, St. Louis Community Credit Union, back to our friends at Justine Peterson. Okay, and then the last thing I want to kind of draw attention to, and perhaps the most important, is this idea about what do we do next, right? So it's easy to kind of end a talk and drop the mic and say we need to dismantle systemic and structural barriers to capitalism. But that's basically what I'm going to say, is that we don't, again, just like the X-ray metaphor, a lot of people of privilege, a lot of people who weren't necessarily paying attention, a lot of people who are living in different communities, you know, are really now being forced to confront some of the systematic and structural problems with American society. Other people have been living it, have been hurt and killed by it, but it's often the case that that's part of how power operates, is that some people don't need to care. Some people have a buffer. But as we know now, as we see how vulnerable, not just Black bodies, but also Black assets are in this economy, then we need to think about how we redistribute not just resources, but how do we also redistribute risk, right? Right. We talk a lot about risk in entrepreneurship and in small business. How do we make sure that the risks and the rewards and the resources are properly shared out, knowing that there are certain places which have more stress, certain places which are more resilient, places which are more vulnerable. So we saw in the last recession, devastation in Black asset building. We don't need to have that happen with COVID, right? We've already seen huge loss of life. It doesn't need to be even more loss of livelihood. people were talking or asking at the beginning about what can we do at the federal level. Well, right now, the Community Redevelopment Act, which is about providing banking and financial services to lower income census tracts, that's up for debate, and there's some sort of rather conservative changes they'd like to make. We also all know a lot about the opportunity zone fiasco. Like, how can we really think about ways of putting money into low-income census tracts? How can we think about incubators and accelerators differently so that they're not just geared towards the sort of students that we get at WashU who are like brilliant and, you know, privileged compared to a lot of people? How do we make sure that the entire community can benefit from some of these projects? And again, how do we understand that we need to have more tailored interventions for the various different groups? And even more, perhaps radically for an American audience, how do we support a variety of ownership structures? Why should a small business be owned by one person, right? How do we have communities who help make that business a success also share perhaps in its prosperity and the win, right? How do we lift up these businesses as a community and share in the profits in our communities when that happens? So that would require a different way of thinking about ownership, but maybe it's time for that. So thank you. I look forward to us being able to have a little bit more time on chat. And here's a good example of people who are trying to do a different type of incubator, our friends over at WePower with the Elevate Elevar incubator. But yeah, I'd just like to end here and give it back to Gary and Janet and to say these are some of the questions that I'm thinking about. What does it mean to build it better? And what do we need to be doing in St. Louis to make sure that there's more sharing of not just resources, but also risks and rewards here in the small business and entrepreneurial space. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That was fantastic, and I really want to compliment this group. I think this is the most generous networking, sharing information. The chat has just been fantastic, as you all have offered resources and guidance and really insightful comments to each other. So what a great team effort led by Heather. One question that came up in the chat that I wonder if you could respond to. Ellen was wondering if there's any emerging science yet regarding factors that are influencing small business owners' decisions as they're facing these tough realities and possibly needing to reduce staff or furlough or layoff. Do we know yet what is guiding their thinking?
I'm hoping that it's talking to their customers and suppliers is guiding their thinking. I know in the startup space, a lot of investors have been touching base with their companies, going over more aggressive roadmaps for the money that they have, sort of focusing the priorities on a few specific customers. But I think also people are hugely affected by what's happening in their communities and in their families, right? So that's also part of what the challenge is that if you are an entrepreneur of color who's in a community that's being devastated because of the health outcomes of COVID, as well as, you know, having people or having, you know, challenges in where you're living because of the protests and the uprising, you're in a very different position to try and think about going out and hustling for your business than someone who's comfortably working from home with no childcare obligations. So I think it's partially the personal perspective, but again, those of us who are running businesses right now just need to be talking to your customers, talking to your suppliers, making sure people feel informed, and then based on that information, making income and cost projections.
So Heather, I really love how you are thinking about how do we reboot the kind of small business sector. And that's really one of the many, and I say this candidly, opportunities that this pandemic has presented. I mean, we're seeing the same thing in early childhood education, which WePower is also working on. They were saying this, the ECE system does not work. The folks that have that need the most have the least amount of access to quality, affordable early childhood education, and those tend to be Black and brown families. And so we see something very similar here in the, you know, small business realm, that it is primarily, you know, Black and brown owned businesses that are bearing the brunt right now how do we ensure, because it's the folks who are in power, those who are in Washington that are making the decisions of where these resources going are, the vast majority of them are straight white guys who have been in power for a very long time, who are sticking to their own. So how do we ensure that, that we don't just, rebuild a system that's not working, but we really focus resources to, expanding access and opportunity for communities and entrepreneurs of color?
Well, I think we're seeing different, I think it depends again sort of how you're positioned and what your different opportunities are to affect change. I think as we're seeing people uprising against police brutality, you'll have people that are writing in the newspaper. You'll have people who are making the statistical case. You'll have people, police officers themselves, organizing and trying to create change as much as they think is possible from the inside. And then you also have people applying pressure by marching night after night and saying this is no longer acceptable, and making the case and helping white people and other allies get educated and be able to make that case. So I think there's going to be different roles. We have different roles as educators of what we can do, as well as being activists. I think often because people see entrepreneurship somewhat as an elite activity, kind of tech bros or whatever, rather than thinking of the grandma who's like started a kindergarten on her street to help some of the working moms in her community, or the guy with like really awesome barbecue that wants to professionalize and, perhaps, put his son to college on his like awesome sauce. Though it's like some of these smaller micro enterprises, we need to pick them up and pull them into all of the great opportunities we have in the ecosystem. And then by having a wider diversity of participants, be able to lobby to get more resources. I know that is kind of a liberal answer, but in addition, also please people take part in the census if you still can, and also people please vote. Because it is a lot of questions about policy changes that need to be made. And we have a very unresponsive or quite destructive administration now. If we have other people in office who are interested in supporting CDFIs and their mission, who are interested in supporting different ways of training and growing and nurturing emerging entrepreneurs, it would look a lot different. And also to make sure the companies that you work for and organizations that you work for have a useful ladder into procurement. Like that's something Washington University has been working on for a long time. How do we make sure that we are buying great products from great entrepreneurs in the community and not just working with large national suppliers? How do we make sure that we're nurturing that talent?
I also just want to let folks know that if you're interested in better understanding this type of systemic and structural racism, that Forward Through Ferguson is offering a number of different trainings. So I would recommend you going to their website, and they are putting together a series of talks that looks at systems change. And that's not just for nonprofit, but it would be for profit as well.
Yeah. And Forward Through Ferguson, of course, in the Ferguson report was like quite a lot of their recommendations was around building economic power into the community. And entrepreneurship and small business ownership is, of course, part of that, and mentoring entrepreneurs of color. Also childcare, of course, being pointed out here, living in Germany where there's free universal childcare makes a difference, especially for the women entrepreneurs. Yes, we will be putting different links up. Just as a note to people, you can copy the chat, but I don't think you'll get the chat when you get the slides. So if you're like, oh my God, there's been so many great links, make sure you just kind of do a copy of the chat before you leave the call later. The other thing, obviously, is WePower is going to be bringing in, WePower is doing a lot around early childhood education that Gary just pointed out. They also have the Elevate Elevar incubator and are doing different community power-up events around community economic decision-making. There's also different other projects, the Center for the Acceleration of African-American Business that was housed at Better Family Life. There are places to join in, also the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. If you look, there'll be places you can join in. And I think the more that this community gets organized, the more power we can deploy.
Well, Heather, this hour flew by. And like Janet said, I have never seen so much commenting in the chat than any other time than this. I wanted to offer you an opportunity to say a few closing remarks, and then I'm going to hand it over to Janet to take us out.
Well, I'm sad that we weren't able to actually like sort of see faces. I'm glad to see my two colleagues, Gary and Janet, but thank you all for participating so much in the chat. And I wish you and your families good health. And I hope this has given you some ideas and maybe a little bit of, fire for the fight. I look forward to being back in St. Louis and working with you on some of these priorities. Those of you who are somehow involved with the university, please feel free to come and take my classes, in both undergraduate and graduate. And those of you in the community, if you think that some of the work that we're doing here or some of the questions that I'm working on are relevant to what you're working on, I love to be in touch and to see how we can work together on some, collective impact in this space. So that's my email, and that's a link to our Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation Lab, a joint venture between our beautiful Brown School and the Olin School of Business. So again, please reach out. Let's please keep the conversation going, and keep a strong heart, and look forward to having hopefully a new administration in the fall, if I'm allowed to say that, and that we can get working on making some of these changes. And otherwise, just keep fighting till we can, be living in the communities we want to be living in. So thank you. Janet?
Thank you so much for that, Heather. That was both hopeful and helpful. The slides are already posted. There was a strong craving in the chat for that. They're already posted on our website. If you do save the chat, you will grab that link as well. But thanks everyone for joining. Thank you to my co-host, Gary. This hour has flown by and been wonderful. So before we leave you today, I want to wish everyone a happy 4th of July weekend, and hope to see you back. Our next program is actually on Tuesday, July 7th. Brown School alum Kaylee Cornelison is giving us a talk on caring for yourself and your team in the era of uncertainty. Those of us who may be dealing with Zoom fatigue, or just how to stay connected in these times. She's got some helpful thoughts for us. And then again, we're back on Thursday for that conversation about COVID-19 and race, talking to children about race and social justice. So with that, thank you all for being here. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and appreciate you spending the time with us here at Open Classroom. Bye now.